Everyone thinks they know Egypt. The pyramids, the Sphinx, the golden mask of Tutankhamun. These iconic images have represented ancient civilization for over a century. But what if I told you that the most mysterious structure in all of Egypt is not the Great Pyramid? What if the real enigma lies buried 50 feet underground, behind a temple that tourists walk past every day without ever knowing what is hidden beneath their feet? This is the Osirion, and after you learn what it conceals, you will never see ancient Egypt the same way again. If you have ever wondered whether mainstream archaeology is telling us the complete story about human history, trust me, you will want to keep watching. The Temple of Seti I at Abydos is considered one of the finest examples of New Kingdom Egyptian architecture. Built around 1290 before Christ, its walls are covered in exquisite reliefs, its columns perfectly proportioned, its chambers meticulously planned. Tourists come from around the world to admire its craftsmanship. But in 1902, archaeologist Margaret Murray made a discovery that would challenge everything Egyptologists thought they knew about the site. Behind the main temple, partially submerged in groundwater that had accumulated over millennia, Murray found a massive subterranean structure built in a completely different architectural style. Enormous granite blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together with precision that seemed almost impossible for the era. She had found the Osirion. Here's the thing. The Osirion does not look like any other structure from Seti I's dynasty. It does not match the architectural vocabulary of the New Kingdom. The construction techniques are fundamentally different from anything else built during that period, and that raises a question that Egyptologists have been struggling to answer for over 100 years. If Seti I built the Osirion as an extension of his temple, why does it look nothing like his temple? Why would a pharaoh known for elegant, decorated monuments suddenly construct a brutal, megalithic structure using methods his own architects had never employed? The standard explanation is that Seti I was deliberately imitating an older, more primitive style as a tribute to Osiris, the god of the underworld. The Osirion, according to this theory, was designed to evoke the architecture of an earlier age, a conscious archaism meant to create a sense of timeless antiquity. But here is the problem. The closer you look at the Osirion, the less convincing this explanation becomes. Let me walk you through what makes this structure so extraordinary. The Osirion is built from red granite and sandstone blocks, some of the largest used in Egyptian construction. The central hall measures approximately 30 meters by 20 meters, with massive pillars supporting equally massive ceiling beams. Each pillar weighs roughly 100 tons. Each ceiling beam, more. Even today, moving stones of this size requires specialized heavy equipment. Cranes, hydraulic systems, carefully engineered transport infrastructure. But the Egyptians of 1290, before Christ, according to mainstream archaeology, they had copper tools, wooden rollers, and ramps. That is it. Now, I am not saying ancient Egyptians were not capable builders. They clearly were. The temples and tombs of the New Kingdom demonstrate remarkable skill and organization. But the Osirion represents a different order of magnitude and engineering challenge. And the engineering is not the only puzzle. Dr. Stephen Mailer, an archaeologist who spent decades studying Egyptian sites, noted something unusual about the Osirion's construction. The blocks are not just large. They are fitted together with almost no gap between them. In many cases, you cannot slip a piece of paper between adjacent stone. This level of precision is extraordinarily difficult to achieve with modern tools, let alone copper chisels and grinding stones. But here is what really caught Mailer's attention. The lower portions of the Osirion show clear evidence of water erosion. Not the kind of erosion you would expect from periodic flooding or groundwater seepage. Deep, vertical weathering patterns consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. Heavy rainfall. In Egypt, when was the last time Egypt experienced the kind of heavy, persistent rainfall that could create such erosion patterns? The answer takes us back thousands of years before the pharaohs. back to a time when the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a green, fertile landscape with rivers, lakes, and regular monsoons. This period, known as the African Humid Period, ended approximately 5,500 years ago. If the water erosion on the Osirion predates the end of the African Humid Period, then the structure cannot have been built by Seti I in 1290 before Christ. It would have to be at least 5,500 years old, and possibly much older. This theory gained significant support from an unexpected source. Dr. Robert Schoch, the Boston University geologist famous for his research on water erosion patterns around the Great Sphinx, examined photographs and survey data from the Osirion. His conclusion was striking. The erosion patterns on the Osirion, Schoch argued, were consistent with those he had documented on the Sphinx enclosure. Both structures showed evidence of prolonged rainfall erosion that should not exist if they were built during the historical dynastic period. Both, in other words, might be far older than mainstream archaeology admits. And this is where it gets controversial. If the Osirion predates the pharaohs by thousands of years, who built it? And why? The structure's design offers some intriguing clues. The central island of the Osirion, surrounded by a channel that would have once been filled with water, mirrors descriptions found in ancient Egyptian texts of the primordial mound of creation. The place where, according to myth, land first emerged from the waters of chaos at the beginning of time. Was the Osirion built to represent this mythological concept? Or was it built to commemorate something real, a memory, passed down through countless generations of an earlier civilization that existed before the great floods that ended the Ice Age? Dr. John Anthony West, who collaborated with Schoch on the Sphinx research, proposed that ancient Egypt inherited its architectural and astronomical knowledge from a pre-existing civilization, a lost culture, destroyed by catastrophic climate change, whose survivors pass fragments of their knowledge to later peoples. The Osirion, in this interpretation, would be a surviving relic of that earlier civilization. Not a copy built by later pharaohs, but an authentic structure from a forgotten age, later incorporated into the religious complex at Abydos. This would explain the architectural discontinuity. The Osirion does not match Seti I's temple, because Seti I did not build it. He built his temple adjacent to a structure that already existed, one his own traditions told him was sacred beyond memory. But here is what mainstream Egyptology does not want to discuss. If West and Schoch are right, the entire chronology of Egyptian civilization would need to be rewritten. The pharaohs would not be the originators of monumental architecture. They would be inheritors, building upon foundations laid by predecessors, whose very existence has been erased from history. And some researchers believe the Egyptian authorities are actively working to prevent this rewriting. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the former head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, has been a fierce defender of conventional chronology. Under his leadership, independent researchers faced significant obstacles when attempting to study controversial sites like the Osirion. Access has been restricted, requests for ground-penetrating radar surveys have been denied, and proposals to conduct radiocarbon dating on organic materials found within the structure have been quietly rejected. Why would Egyptian authorities be reluctant to date the Osirion using modern methods? Perhaps they already know what the results would show. In 2018, a French geological team managed to conduct limited studies on sediment samples from the Osirion's water channel. Their analysis suggested that the sediment had accumulated over a period far exceeding the 3,300 years that would be expected if the structure dated to Seti I's reign. The team's report was never formally published. When contacted for comment, the lead researchers stated only that their findings had been inconclusive and that further study would be needed. Further study that has never been permitted. The pattern is familiar. Data that challenges conventional narratives gets suppressed. Researchers who ask uncomfortable questions find their access revoked. And structures that should not exist continue to sit beneath the desert sun, holding secrets that someone, somewhere, would prefer remain unexamined. But the Osirion is not just anomalous in its age. It is anomalous in its purpose. Unlike virtually every other Egyptian temple, The Osirion contains no decorations on its walls, no hieroglyphics, no painted reliefs, no cartouches identifying its builder or dedicating it to specific gods. This absence is extraordinary. Egyptian pharaohs were obsessive about leaving their marks on everything they built. Cartouches and inscriptions appear on temples, tombs, obelisks, even individual building blocks. The urge to be remembered, to have one's name preserved for eternity, was fundamental to Egyptian royal ideology. Yet, the Osirion is blank. The only inscriptions found in the structure were added later, by Seti I and his grandson Merenptah, who carved their names into existing surfaces. But these additions are clearly secondary. The underlying structure was built without any identifying marks at all. Who builds a massive underground temple without signing their work? Someone who did not use Egyptian writing. Someone who lived before Egyptian civilization entirely. And there is one more detail that researchers have struggled to explain. The Osirion's ceiling beams, massive granite slabs weighing dozens of tons each, were fitted into place with remarkable precision. But the method of installation remains a complete mystery. There is no evidence of ramp systems that could have raised such weights. No sign of the wooden scaffolding that would be required by conventional lifting techniques. No indication of how 100-ton blocks were maneuvered into position in an underground space with limited access and no room for the massive labor forces that Egyptian construction typically required. It is as if the builders had access to technologies or techniques that leave no archaeological trace. Methods that do not match anything in the Egyptian construction toolkit. Some researchers have noted similarities between the Osirion and other megalithic structures around the world. The Osirion's massive granite blocks and precision joinery bear a striking resemblance to constructions at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, at Pumapunku in Bolivia, and at certain features of the Great Pyramid itself. Could these structures share a common origin, a global civilization, or a common source of knowledge that predated all the civilizations we know? The idea remains controversial, but the physical evidence, the engineering precision, the geological aging, and the absence of inscriptions keep pointing in uncomfortable directions. What do we really know about the Osirion? We know it exists. We know it is built with techniques and materials that set it apart from every other New Kingdom structure. We know it shows erosion patterns consistent with a climate that has not existed in Egypt for over 5,000 years. We know it contains no original inscriptions. And we know that access to study it has been systematically restricted for decades. We know, in other words, that someone is uncomfortable with what deeper investigation might reveal. The official position remains that Seti I built the Osirion around 1290 before Christ as a symbolic representation of the underworld. This explanation requires us to believe that a pharaoh suddenly adopted construction techniques never used before or since, deliberately left his creation unmarked, and built with a precision that even modern engineers find difficult to replicate. It requires us to ignore the water erosion, to dismiss the geological evidence, to accept that the greatest architectural discontinuity in Egyptian history has a simple explanation that just happens to preserve conventional chronology. Some people find that explanation satisfying, but if you have made it this far, I suspect you are not one of them. The Osirion sits beneath the Egyptian desert, half submerged in ancient water, holding questions that mainstream archaeology would prefer not to answer. Questions about who we are, about what came before us, about what we might have forgotten. Maybe the structure is exactly what conventional Egyptology says it is. A symbolic monument built by a New Kingdom pharaoh with unusual architectural tastes. Or maybe it is something else entirely. A window into a past that extends far deeper than we have been taught. Evidence that human civilization did not begin where the textbooks say it did. A reminder that history is written by those with the power to decide what gets remembered and what gets forgotten. 50 feet below the surface, the granite blocks wait. They have waited for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. They can wait a little longer for someone brave enough to ask what they really mean. If you made it this far, thank you. Leave a like if this mystery resonated with you. Tell us what you think the Osirion really is, and which ancient site we should investigate next. Subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the mysteries that history tried to bury. Some structures stand longer than the civilizations that built them, and some truths wait even longer.